Hello, Mr. Wood for you. I need to quickly check. I think you were J. Cole's mid, but I need to double check. Otherwise, I'm going to review the wrong dude, and that's going to be like a like a huge waste of time for both of us. What review? There we go. Where are you? Yeah, J. Cole is mid. Okay, perfect. Everything is Gucci. So, hopefully, this gameplay is going to be very, very pleasant. You know, my expectations are definitely high. Um, yeah, there is one. I mean, actually, I'm gonna the way I'm gonna treat this is like almost like a completely separate thing, from the previous reviews that you had. Obviously, some of the skills are going to transfer, like when we talked about your diva or whatever. But just something to keep in mind that when I go over this gameplay, I'm going to be treating you as like this is going to be completely separate, basically, is what I'm saying. But okay. I guess before we look at the gameplay, I should maybe give you like a quick little rundown of what I'm going to be looking here, especially for your Zarya. So ultimately, the way that you can categorize Zarya is in three phases, which is actually a very good way to think about it because it's kind of in parallel with how a lot of other characters are supposed to be played. Okay, so for example, other tanks. So I'm going to try to make this as abstract as possible, and then you can kind of apply it onto other characters, okay? So each character always has some form of setup stage. They have some form of ult farming stage, or just their general default stage that they're in. And then finally, they have one stage separate for their ultimate. Okay, so what does that look like with Zarya? So the first one is setup, and as Zarya, your main form of setup is going to be bubble usage. So this is about how you should play in order to get as much energy as possible as quickly as possible. Then stage 2 is usually the stage where you farm the most ult charge. So for Zarya, that means once you have your energy, that's when you can maximize your own effectiveness. You don't really care that much about energy. You want to use your abilities and you want to position in a way that doesn't maximize your energy, but rather maximizes your damage output. And then lastly, you have the ult phase, which in of itself can also get split into like a setup phase, in case you need to set up your ultimate. Or with certain ultimates, they don't really require any setup, like Reinhardt setup, for example. In that case, you can just go right for it. Okay, and for Zarya, for example, that would mean you want to make sure that you have energy. Maybe you want to make sure that they don't have any shields, and then you can go for the ultimate. Okay, but it's just, in my opinion, it's a very good way to kind of think about to think about Overwatch gameplay in separate stages, and then in game constantly reminding yourself, what stage am I in right now? As Zarya right now, what stage are we in? Well, we don't really have a lot of energy, which means that we are in the energy farming stage. Okay, so why is that important? Because it tells us that we don't really care about our damage output right now, because that's another stage, and we don't really care about anything ultimate related, because obviously we don't have it. Okay, so whenever we are in a stage, whatever we need to focus on in the other stages doesn't really matter to us. Okay. Now, as you get into higher ratings, the game is going to get significantly more nuanced, of course, and you might have to think about 5 or 6 different stages and how those interact with your teammates and all of that stuff. But basically, for now, what it boils down to is those 3. Okay. So wait, let me go back a little. I need to see how you used your first bubble. Okay, using bubble out of spawn like that is okay. Obviously not amazing. Bubble on the run is fine because you held onto it until he was actually taking damage. He's feeding, but that's not your fault. All you can do here is just spam your damage. Okay, nice bubble. Yeah, so basically now that you're done with stage 1, you're in stage 2. Right, so I'm gonna be honest, the fact that you got a lot of energy here partially is really just because your Reinhardt fed. If your Reinhardt didn't feed here, then it's more difficult to get energy off of him, because you kind of need to balance your bubble around how defensive he plays. But obviously if he's suicidal and he just runs in like that, then you're basically guaranteed max energy. And then the same thing with your self bubble. The self bubble that you used was actually a little bit too early. Okay, so I mean the self bubble right here. Okay. There we go. So you used it when you still had 374 HP. Generally speaking, if we want to use our bubbles for the purpose of energy farming, we need to try a little bit harder to bait the enemy team into shooting our bubble. Okay, and the enemy team isn't really going to shoot our bubble if we are like full HP, because they don't really expect to kill us, right? But if we have taken a bit of damage before, when we almost lost all of our shields, we're baiting the enemy team into shooting a bubble because they think, hey, okay, I know that shooting the Zarya bubble is bad, but like, she's kind of low HP, so I kind of want to go for the kill anyways. Okay, so that's why this bubble was earlier, a little too early. One of the main reasons you still got energy out of it, though, obviously, is because your Reinhardt died. Okay, so I guess the main takeaway is that the more suicidal your main tank is, the easier it will be for you to get energy, even if it negatively affects your overall win rate. Okay, so it's kind of a balance. The better your main tank is, the less you have to carry, but also the more difficult it would be to carry if you had to. So it kind of balances itself out. But yeah, right now all you need to do is just chill. Your energy is dropping a little, so you might... What was that for? Question mark? Okay, so I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt here, and I am going to assume that you didn't mean to bubble the Genji. I'm assuming you wanted to bubble the charging Reinhardt. That said, even if this bubble would have connected with the charging Reinhardt, this still would have been a bad bubble. Okay, because the main reason, or one of the biggest values you can get out of your bubbles is a wasted time investment for the enemy team. Okay, so for example, if the enemy Ana uses her nade on your Reinhardt, then you can cancel that nade with your bubble. Right, that's an example of the enemy team having wasted, like completely wasted resource. They got no value out of that nade really, besides a little bit of damage. Okay, if you use your bubble too early, you're basically telling the Reinhardt like he needs to get out because I don't have bubble for you. Okay, so ideally you want the enemy team to have to force out the bubbles. Okay, you don't want to just give them those bubbles for free, because then they see those bubbles and they say, okay, he just used his bubble, free kill. I mean, what are they supposed to do? Okay, instead you want to hold onto them for as long as possible, right, and force them to really put in effort to get the bubble out. So what that means here is that you let your Reinhardt charge in, you let him be aggressive, right, and only if the enemy team actually invests resources into him do you want to use your bubble. Okay, now what that means is that your bubbles always have a proactive and a reactive side to them. Okay, proactive in the way you want to set up situations where you can use your bubble reactively. Okay, so what does that mean exactly? We don't want to use our bubble proactively in the way that we use it and then we run in. Okay, but we do want to play proactively so that we can use our bubble reactively. So what that means is proactively running into the enemy team, intentionally taking damage, and then reacting to that damage by using your bubble reactively. Okay, I know that the phrasing is a little confusing, but you want to set up situations in which you can use your bubbles proactively, but the bubbles themselves always need to react to incoming damage. You don't want to use them anticipatively, or whatever the fuck the English term for that is called, right? You don't want to use them in an anticipative way, I guess, unless it's guaranteed damage. So, for example, running into a D.Va bomb is kind of the classical example. But yeah, so that Reinhardt bubble, again, if we would assume, if we were to assume that you wanted to bubble the Reinhardt, is a problem, because all the enemy team would have seen now, right, if you bubbled him, is, oh, okay, this Reinhardt, he just charged in, and oh, a Zarya bubble just disappeared from him. Right? They just see a Reinhardt who just charged in and who can no longer get Zarya bubbled. Whereas if you wouldn't have bubbled him, then the enemy team would see a charging in Reinhardt, but they would need to keep in mind, wait, he hasn't been bubbled yet, has he? So do we really want to commit onto him? And if they decide to do commit onto him, you just bubble him, you get a bunch of energy, the enemy team wastes a bunch of their time, and everyone is happy. Okay, I need to go back to your POV. Also, in case you can't tell, I'm a little exhausted, so if I sound like I'm on the verge of death, I do apologize. Okay, so let's go back here a little as well. So again, the bubble is just a little too early. If he's really going to charge into the enemy team, like he's probably dead anyway, so you might as well just draw out the bubble as long as possible. Okay. Because just so you're ready for certain things to happen. Okay, maybe he gets nano boosted, or maybe he, as with right here, maybe he just doesn't hit the pin, or maybe he gets countercharge. Right? Just because your Reinhardt is charging straight into the enemy team doesn't mean that something can't save him. Like I said, the nano boost or a sound barrier or whatever. Right? So right here, he kind of saved himself because his pin got stuck against the corner, which means it would have been much, much better to bubble him when he gets charged by the Reinhardt. Okay, because that would have actually saved his life. Okay, so don't just assume when someone does something stupid to bubble them immediately. And again, this goes into the whole use your bubbles reactively, right? So either reactively or in an anticipative way, not proactively. Okay, the reason it was proactive is because you just assumed he charges in, I'm going to bubble him, and he's going to take a bunch of damage, right? If you bubble him while he is getting pinned by a Reinhardt, that would be anticipative, because you know 100% he is going to take that damage. Okay, so in that case, it's okay to bubble him ahead of time. Okay, but a Reinhardt pin, at the end of the pin, if he hits a wall, is a guaranteed 300 damage. But your Reinhardt charging into the enemy team, you never know. Maybe he's not going to take any damage. Maybe the enemy team is just going to ignore him, right? Obviously a bit of a dramatic example, but that's why you always want to use your abilities you want to be proactive about your setup, but you want to be reactive in your execution. Okay. Let's go back a little. How did you use yourself here? Yeah, see, so now this is another example of a bad self-bubble, because we need to understand that now we are no longer in stage 1 of Zarya gameplay, which would be farming up our energy. Now we are in stage 2. Okay, and stage 2 is defined as we no longer care about our energy, right? We already have enough energy, and instead we want to use our bubbles or specifically your self-bubble, as leverage against the enemy team. Right? The enemy team knows that as long as you have that self-bubble, the moment they commit onto you, right? If that Ana throws a nade at you, for example, she knows it's just going to get cleansed off. If the enemy Reinhardt charges you, right, he knows this Zarya is just going to bubble before I pin her, and then she's not going to take any damage, right? So simply, you cannot underestimate the power of simply having your self bubble available. And the way that you use your self bubble here, okay, you used your self bubble to get, basically, you used it to get 13 energy. Okay, you used it to get 13 energy. Okay, and if I can give you like an analogy here, okay, so this is kind of a weird analogy, but I think it fits really well. In a Breaking Bad episode, some dude, he owes money to the IRS, so he gets a lot of money. Okay, spoiler alert, right? So all he needs to do is use that money and then pay off the IRS, and then he's good to go, right? But what he does instead is he says, okay, I'm going to take this money, I'm going to buy myself a nice car instead, which obviously isn't a very, very smart play, okay? And that's kind of what you're doing here, Like, yes, getting the car with your money would be a pretty good idea, the same way that, getting energy with your bubble would be a good idea, but there's this big other thing you need to take care of first, okay? So it's not like getting energy from your self bubble is ever bad, it's just that the value of not using your bubble is larger than the value of getting this little bit of energy, right? The value of paying the IRS is bigger than the value of buying yourself a BMW, okay? So yeah, now you have a bunch of energy, but because you don't have your self bubble, what the fuck are you supposed to do with it? You're just chilling here. I don't know what to do. There's a bunch of enemies in front of me, but the moment I push around that corner, I'm just going to end super duper hard. Oh. And then again, right here. Okay, so we need to read the situation. Our Reinhardt is pinning in, right? What does that tell us? Okay, well, it means we have a lot of space to work with, because everyone is going to be looking at that Reinhardt. How do we want to play around that? Well, we have two options. We can either say, okay, this position here is fine. I can shoot the Reinhardt. I don't need to push up. Or we can say, oh, wait, the enemy, our Reinhardt has a bunch of attention on him. I can use this opportunity to take space and push up. Okay, so you could have pushed up across the choke, maybe use your self bubble to get there. Okay, the problem is right? Those are your two options. Staying here without using your bubble, going in, but using your bubble. But this is what you do, right? You end up using your bubble and you didn't go through. So that bubble didn't give you any space. The only value you got from that bubble is precisely... What is it with you and 13 energy? Man, this is like you buying that BMW, going to jail for 5 years because you didn't pay the IRS, then being put into the exact same situation again. Like you need to understand here, right? Like you needed to realize I was useless these past 10 seconds because I didn't have my bubble. I need to be a bit more careful about using my bubble without getting anything out of it, right? And again, that didn't happen here, unfortunately, because you just use your bubble. All you get out of that is 13 energy. Okay. And at that point, right now, you have all the energy in the world, right? And in a lot of games, this is important to understand, in a lot of games, getting energy in of itself, that's the big hurdle. And it's not like you're having any issues with that. You are basically drowning in energy, which is super duper nice, you know? But that energy is basically pointless if this is how you use it, you know? AKA not at all, because you never have a self bubble, and without a self bubble you can't really play aggressively, okay? As Zarya, you are an off tank, okay? And the job behind an off tank is kind of being your main tank's right hand. Your Reinhardt is really good at holding space, but well, without the pressure from the off tank, it's very difficult for him to take space, right? So the two of you need to work together. If your Reinhardt pushes up, you need to push up in order to supply him with damage, and if your Reinhardt backs off, then you need to back off because he is the one providing you with protection. So if he backs off, you would be unprotected. You need to back up as well. But the important thing is that how you play directly influences how your Reinhardt plays, and how your Reinhardt plays directly influences how you play. Okay. Now, this ultimate here is... There's like no nice way to put it. Actually, there is. This was... This decision was made with limited cognitive input. Let's phrase it that way. Just think about your situation here, right? Your teammates are chilling back on the point, right? All of the enemies are in front of you, and your teammates need like 30% more capture percentage. Okay, so I don't think it would be a stretch to say that this point is basically secure. Okay, so you already have that objective, and after that, it takes a while for that objective actually to get pushed, right? Which means that you don't really have anything to gain out of winning a team fight right now. Because if you don't grab the enemy team here and kill them, you're going to push the payload. And if you do grab them, you're going to push the payload. So why did you use the grab? You didn't really gain any objective out of it. You didn't really win a team fight because of it, because this team fight is basically already won. You know, the enemy team can't really get back to the point in time. Okay. That's number one. And then number two, if your teammates are capturing the point, it means they're not really there to follow you up. You know, you're chilling all the way over there. You're using your ultimate. Very nice. But the only people following up are like the supports. And your two DPS are still chilling in the back. Okay, so that's also a problem. And then another problem, okay, so and this is important to understand, the only reason this ultimate got any value in the first place, the only reason you got those kills, is because your Reinhardt went for a Shatter, and your Ana went for a nade. Okay, so the only reason this ultimate is getting the kills it does is because of the Shatter and because of the nade, right? Because what happens? What would have happened if your if the anti-nade didn't come through? Well, Ana could just heal and nade, and you know that would keep them alive. What happens if the Reinhardt Shatter didn't come through? Well, the enemy Reinhardt would have just used his shield. Okay, now I don't want to talk over my ass. Did he have shield? Yes, he did. See, there's a full 1600 shield. Okay, and this kind of brings us to stage 3 that I talked about earlier, and the ult stage. And for Zarya specifically, the ult stage in of itself is kind of split into 2 stages, right? So that's where all of the nuance comes in. Where before we use our ultimate, we want to make sure that we actually have the correct setup for that, right? We want to make sure that the enemy team is weakened. So for example, does the enemy Baptiste have his immortality field? Because if we grab and he has his immortality field, pretty tough to get kills if he places it around the corner. Does the Zarya have bubbles? That's something to take into account. Does the enemy Reinhardt have his shield? That's something to take into account. So right here, the Reinhardt has his shield, the Zarya has her self bubble, and the Baptiste has his immortality field. Right? So there was basically no real trigger. You know, your ultimate, you want to use it opportunistically. You want to wait until the enemy team makes a mistake, like the enemy Reinhardt not managing his shield so it breaks, or the enemy Baptiste wasting his immortality field. Those are opportunities that the enemy team gives you that you can use, that you can punish. Okay, but you don't want to just use your ultimate when the enemy team has a bunch of answers. Okay, because again, it's not really the Grav that won the team fight. It's Grav plus Shatter plus Nade. And if you need to use that many ultimates to win a team fight, did you really win? You know? Yeah, it's like, again, sorry for the stupid analogy, but this is like, imagine you having a feud with your neighbor, and you spend like $20,000 to pay some dude to like shit on his lawn. Like, did you really win? You know? Like, you spent $20,000 for that. You know, and it's kind of the same thing here. Like, yes, like you won the team fight, but you didn't win it. You know, and yeah, look where the payload is. What did this do for you? 3 ultimates invested for what? You know, because the enemy team is just going to regroup. And again, look where the payload is right now. Look, you're like chilling over there, but the problem is this space. How are you supposed to control it? How are you supposed to hold it? Because keep in mind, right now, right, math is helpful. There's 5 people here. Okay, because there's one last person back here. Right, so there's a choice. Either you guys fight 6v6 over here, but wait a second. Then no one's pushing the payload. So what exactly do we get out of being here 6v6? Right? Or the person is on the payload, right, and you're fighting 5v6. But even if you don't outright die, even if you don't outright lose a team fight 5v6, you're definitely going to lose that space. There's no way you can hold this space 5v6, which means all of the space that this ulti gave you, you're just going to lose and lose and lose and lose until you've regrouped with the Torbjorn. Okay, and that's why using your ultimate there when you already had the advantage is bad, because this is kind of a concept that comes from card games, actually. So in a lot of card games, there are certain cards, right, kind of fun cards that aren't really meta, that, for example, they deal more damage the lower the enemy, the lower the enemy's HP is. Okay, and in the context of card games, depending on how it's implemented, that card doesn't really make a lot of sense because, or no, it's not based on the total amount of enemy HP, it's based on the difference. Okay, so for example, if you have twice as much HP as the enemy, it deals like 3 damage or something. But if your HP is equal, it's only 1 damage, you know? And those cards are called win harder cards, and they're basically universally trash, okay, unless there's some gimmick or loophole you can use, okay? Because if you already have like twice as much HP as the enemy, do you really need like a card that helps you win even harder? Why wouldn't you instead put a card in your deck that is very strong when the enemy has twice as much HP as you do, right? So a lose less card, right? You want to have options that turn shit situations into good situations, not just for Overwatch, for any sort of competitive game. What you don't want is, you know, plays or cards or whatever, moves that take a good situation and make it better, because ultimately it's a zero-sum game. You can either win or you lose. How hard you win or you lose doesn't really matter. Okay, with again, like, put a little asterisk there, because there are other things at play, but generally speaking, it doesn't matter how hard you win a team fight. So yeah, obviously in the higher elo you get into like ult economy and space management, and in those cases how hard you win a team fight does become important. But yeah, right here, not worth it. Because look what's happening. Look, what like, I didn't even notice what's going on. Like, weren't you up here like 5 seconds ago? And look where you're at now. Right back at square one. The payload is exactly where you ulted. You know, so didn't really do anything. Okay, and then the enemy Baptiste dies, which is nice, but then your Reinhardt dies, and now we don't have our ultimate, so look, we have the payload over there, but where are we? All of that space that we so desperately tried to attain, gone. Down the drain. Completely unusable. Okay? And that's the problem, because you invested a Zarya Grav, and you invested a Reinhardt Shatter, and you invested an Ana in it. You invested so much stuff. So much stuff into that one team fight. Okay? So I think this is a good point to summarize, just so that this doesn't get too repetitious. Okay? So to summarize, number one, you want to make sure that you subdivide your playstyle into individual stages. Okay, so at the start, you can maybe do 3 stages, one for setting up, the second for farming ult, the third for using your ult, and then as you get into higher levels of play, you can subdivide those stages into more stages to add more nuance to your gameplay. The first step there would be separating your ult usage stage into a ult setup and an ult execution stage, right? Making sure that you keep track of opportunities like the enemy team using their cooldowns, for example. Okay, you want to make sure that you use your bubbles in a reactive way, but that you proactively put yourself into situations where you can use your bubble reactively. Okay, so putting yourself in harm's way so you can reactively bubble to that harm. Or if one of your teammates goes in, only using your bubble reactively. Don't just use it because you think harm is coming towards them. Only use it if actually there is definitely harm coming towards them, or they've already taken damage and they're in danger. Okay, again, the exception being anticipative damage. So Diva Bomb, for example, Pulse Bomb, that sort of stuff, or even something like a Genji Blade. In those situations, or it's perfectly fine to just bubble someone the moment you are certain that person is going to take damage from that particular damage source. And then lastly, proper ult economy, right? Making sure that you use your ultimates when you actually have something to gain. Okay, so is this ult? Ask yourself questions like, is this ultimate really necessary in order to progress the card here? Is this ultimate, is this team fight win really necessary for me right now? What am I going to gain out of this? Am I going to get time on the clock? Is that good for me? Is that bad for me? Depending on whether I'm on attack and defense. Am I going to get control of space? Right? And then asking yourself, is this space that I can hold? Or is this space that I'm going to lose in like 5 seconds anyways? Right? So like in that example. And yeah, so those are things to think about. Keep in mind, I try to keep all of this as general as possible. So don't think of this as like strictly a Zarya review. Obviously the things we talked about, like bubble usage and stuff, are like that, but the general concept of gameplay stages, the general concept of understanding when to use our ultimates in order to win objectives, in order to win space and other advantages later down the line, they apply to all of the other characters, right? So if you want to play like main tank or DPS or whatever, applies to those the same, just something to keep in mind. But yeah, just so that I don't sound like a broken record, I think we are done here. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. Keep in mind that once this VOD review is delivered, you have the 7-day window for the 40% follow-up discount. So if you want to get another review, or if you want to get a coaching session, make sure to do so within 7 days, because that way you save 40%, after which the discount slowly goes away until it's gone, and you would have to pay full price again. But yeah, now that the capitalism talk is done, my DMs are always open. Questions galore. You can even send in replay codes if you need any help. And I wish you the best of luck.